Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Autism Stories. I'm your host, Doug Bletcher, the founder of Autism Personal Coach. Autistic people are the true experts of the autistic experience, and Autism Stories is where we interview autistic people to learn from their diverse stories, experiences, and get their insights. If you would like to be notified about each week's episode of Autism Stories, we suggest you subscribe on your favorite podcast listening platform. On today's episode, Freya Pinney joins us to discuss art therapy and connecting with other neurodivergent people. We hope you enjoy today's conversation. Freya, thanks so much for joining me here on Autism Stories.
Thanks for having me, Doug.
I'd love to start off by learning, where does your story in the autistic community begin?
Great question. It begins probably with my son. I'm an adult diagnosed. Well, I'm old enough that I couldn't really have been diagnosed as a child, given that I have the more recently recognized presentation of autism, which in the past would have been picked up differently. So it's been about 10, 11 years now that I've been identifying as autistic, and probably I think 9 years or maybe 10 years now that I've been diagnosed as autistic. My son is just amazing and I love him to pieces, and he's an exceptional little human being. And when he was really struggling with just, functioning and being himself in the world outside of our house as a little neurodivergent bubble, it became really clear that there was something very different in the way that he communicated, in the way that he was around people. And he was like, I don't get it. Like, what's happening? Why do people think I'm different? Why do people use the word disability? And he has a cousin who has quadriplegic cerebral palsy. And he's like, I'm not in a wheelchair like Sam. Why people say I'm disabled? And I just looked at him and said, mate, your brain works a lot like mine. And people find that confronting. And they find it very confronting in a child. So they kind of look at a whole lot of things, and in a child, if they can put enough things together, they might give you a label like autism or ASD, and it actually is just there to help people know other ways of communicating with you, and so that you can get enough support so that you're allowed to just be you, but people have a better insight into how to ask you maybe more questions. Like, that's how we handled it in our family, was to just be really like, we all have brains that work a little different here, and you fit in with us perfectly, but to the outside world, that's a little confronting, especially because I have a little mini me who's hyperverbal and smart and will just say stuff to people and be very literal, but in a group of people will shut right down. Yeah. And is a very different person. And so after that, it was like a steep learning curve, basically. I mean, I knew enough to identify that was what was going on, but really outside of that, I didn't know anything. And so for me, it was a steep learning curve of just allowing my child to be who he was, which is kind of the upbringing that I had, which was amazing. And I can reflect now and just be so proud of the job that my parents did, allowing me to always be who I was. But I didn't want my child to have the self-doubt that I had. And so for me, I jumped into networks online. I found information, and I found some really fabulous organizations in Australia that were developed by, made for, and all run by autistic people. And it was just amazing. So the Autistic Realm Australia was an amazing place for me to find a community of neurokindred and to just be able to learn to thrive being who I am.
I'm interested because with my mom, she just allowed me to be who I was, not knowing that I was autistic at the time. I'm wondering how that impacted you once you learned yourself that you were autistic. Do you think that in any way helped you to kind of process things?
It's really tricky for me because my mum passed away just before my son was born. So I guess I didn't think to have any overt conversations with her at the time when she was still around. And I didn't realize the role that she played for me in being able to process the world with support until she was not there. My partner at the time, though, really noticed that. It was like a massive change for my system to look back and understand. It was also really confronting, realizing, because I had a big breakup from a 20-year long-term relationship. And it was in the process of going to stay with my sister that we actually realized for the first time that we had been raised quite differently by our mother. And neither of us really knew the differences and how far apart she was in the way that she raised both of us at the same time. And that was a really amazing moment for me of appreciating the way that she let us be who we were. And so for me, a nighttime routine would include talking through the difficulties I'd had that day, socializing and all of the nuances and all of the challenges and the struggles, and me offloading lots of anxiety, and then literally doing almost like verbal social stories for the next day and role playing and actually scripting out all the conversations I was worried about for the next day. That was all part of my bedtime routine every single day growing up with my mom. And my sister got, I love you, here's a song and a dance and a cuddle, and off she went to sleep. And neither of us knew that that was what was happening for each other in the separate bedrooms. And it never came to us that it would be different. And so that's I think an incredibly amazing human to be able to hold space like that for different people's needs at the same time, and to neither of us ever felt invalid for what we needed, or even that it was different. Now I'm looking back and I don't know how she had the capacity to hold all of that plus process her own day every single day while working full time, and you know what I mean, like a lot. But I know that's what amazing humans and parents do.
You are an art therapist and also known as the process repository. What does that name, process repository, mean to you?
It's a growing and evolving process in and of itself. I really like it as a concept. I think people think art therapy is going to be an art lesson, like commonly, or that it will be OT related and you'll get skills in like how to hold a brush or a pen, or something will come through. And while those things can actually happen in the process, the intention isn't that at all. So art therapy really is about working with materials to be able to come to know something about yourself that emerges through that engagement, and may or may not be communicated verbally at all. And for some, it will be like, if you're hyperverbal like me, it's going to involve lots of words to process while you're making, or potentially poetic words or just sounds or whatever, because I'm very verbal. That will be a process for me. However, as a therapist, I'm often very not verbal. So I match the needs of someone I'm working with. So I have whole sessions in which I don't speak at all. And I'm attuned to whatever the needs are of that person. It is about the process and about me holding that space for them. So in that sense, it can seem that the process repository is a safe space in which you can store or explore or express or come to know what's important for you. And, talking about being able to let go of the rational, logical thought and the patterns and the expectations around us to allow something new to come forward. And sometimes that's an individual process, and sometimes that's something we do together. So it's often really co-creating or working with materials. And it can be really different. What that looks like is hard, I think, for people to understand. And sometimes it looks like kids jumping on furniture and tables and running outside and grabbing mud and having mud fights. And sometimes it looks like people touching soft fabrics and lying on the ground, and sometimes it looks like screaming at trees. And sometimes it looks like jumping in and out of water. Like it's whatever needs to happen for that process in the moment.
Now, as an art therapist, one of the things you do is help create personalized communication resources for neurodivergent people. What might this look like from an art therapy perspective?
Well, the ones that I created, I think earlier this year, came out of the need or the request of the individual person I was working with. What we were looking for is that they really struggle to communicate when they're having a tough time, and that can be fairly regularly for them. And they had actually purchased a whole lot of different sets of communication cards, but having to actually sort through and try to find something in the moment was just incredibly overwhelming and almost impossible for them. And what they wanted was a bridging resource that said, back off because I just can't communicate right now. But they also needed it to be something that could be put in a space where people entering their home to support them already had that as a resource. And so it meant we sat together and they talked about what they were finding challenging. And then we actually explored their environment. So we tried out all the different light settings. We tried out all sorts of resources that they themselves had. And what we worked out for them personally was that they needed to know, they didn't know which one they would need in the moment, but they needed to have a list of what they would be and a visual representation of that so that they could point to things. And so it was actually a process that it needed to be really personal, that person. And that's how I think it works the most successfully, is that it becomes an art therapeutic process because it's the same thing. We're treating their needs as the same emergent process of looking through materials and resources. So everyone knows what they need when they're in a calm space. They can talk about, oh, well, when that happened, I needed access to a fan because the blowing of the cool air in my face helps me regulate. But in the moment, they didn't have access to be able to communicate that. So what we did was just create a whole lot of visual representations and then write the words on in a calm space when we could. And those, for that individual, went into a online app so that any person coming in and out of their environment would be given the resources before they entered. And it also sat on their wall so they could point to it and they didn't have to search through things for it. And for them, it actually just provided a visual reminder of support. And so that even if it was while they didn't have a paid support person, but they had a friend or a partner visiting, that it could equally be applied with them. And so it served the purpose of going through the processes to remind them all of the support that they had, but also being there for them in that moment. And they can have small card versions made from those which they can carry in their bag or their purse as well.
Now, my spouse is an art therapist, so I personally see the immense value of art therapy. I've seen how it's brought to others. In what ways have you seen art therapy benefit autistic people beyond communication resources?
There's a whole lot of things that I see and have seen over the time. They are really magical when they happen. Like the first time when I was in someone's environment and when you're in someone's space and you're a therapist, there's a whole lot that you just pick up on. And for me, as someone who's autistic, I pay a lot of attention to all that sensory stuff around me. And while this person was just getting ready and trying to settle himself into the space, I just felt the real need to throw a piece of fabric in their direction. And they picked it up and were just like, how did you know that that is what I needed to feel in this moment? And I said, well, I didn't. I just took a chance. And from that, so much came out of them that it brought up a memory, it brought up a smell, it brought up a color. And by embracing those things and actually helping them to create some representation of that, a whole lot of memories flooded for them. And they were able to kind of work through the way that they remembered things from their past and adding in extra sensory kinds of experiential elements, which for them were largely the textures and then colors. And it bringing that in relation to a memory, they ended up letting out things that they had thought were really traumatic and then making new connections for themselves about that. This particular participant or person that I was working with, I worked with over several years. And we actually did a radio show together about, a project that we had done together. And in that, she was, she said all sorts of things that she hadn't said in private to me, but she said it quite publicly. And she was saying for her, art therapy had saved her life because she had done talk therapy for 20 or 30 years. And she just felt that it wasn't helping her change anything in herself. She didn't really feel that it was anything other than a repetitive process of going and talking to people that didn't really understand and that they'd just give her medication and she'd just walk away. And so actually being able to process things and let things flood as they came and then have new ways of exploring concepts through materials had really just changed her ability to engage with things that she had once found traumatic or it gave her a sense of self that she had lost and forgotten. Also, she had really struggled with words, and she had a desperate desire to be able to find words again. And I invited her to join a group poetry project. And after not really being able to write words or really express herself verbally either for a long time, and she's, I'd say she's mid to late 50s in age, she ended up being able to write poetry, and it brought so much to her, the ability to express emotion and feeling and memories, not only through a personal experience to her, but then eventually finding words for it. It was like liberation for her. Like, I think it's something that she had given up on, this idea that she would ever find that part of herself. And even in her late 50s, to find that gave her such an amazing sense of self. That's a couple of examples, but yeah, I see a lot that's quite exceptional. Like working with children, I have had a few different children who really struggle with having a concept of feelings for themselves altogether, let alone being able to identify the sensations in the body, like, through interoception issues, or having a concept or language for emotions, like with alexithymia. But having children go from very high levels of anxiety and situational mutism to finding safe spaces in a community where they feel like they can go and engage. It's a very long process for a lot of people, but to develop a network around their own home, in a community around them, where they know that they can go if they get lost or disoriented, or if they aren't sure how they're feeling or what's going on for them, but they know there's we've developed, I think, 5 places in one of the young person's community where they know that they can go. And one of them is the local art gallery. They have used art to communicate and connect to the people that work there. And they now have a little gallery inside their staff room for their art. And they know, for example, when they walk in, that they need to create a separate table with separate resources. They have now got a cupboard, because this young person goes there a few times a week. They keep certain materials in the cupboard for them. And they've now actually put a permanent sensory friendly space into that gallery. So an autistic artist had an exhibition there and said that they wouldn't do it unless they created a sensory space. And then it actually encouraged so many more people to spend time in the gallery from the local community. And the gallery was just incredibly surprised. They did a big feedback process. And then eventually they've now created a permanent one. So the initial one was temporary, kind of cardboard constructed. The permanent one is like a proper wooden engineered space. So it's been, amazing for the community, but also for this young person. And she has now even started speaking in that space. And that's been a really long process and incredible for her, like to reach a level of safety and calm in that space.
I read where you wrote, where you said there's something magical in the meeting of neurodivergent people. There's something overwhelming in the meeting of neurodivergent people. How do you go about balancing the magic and overwhelm when you meet other neurodivergent folks?
I think it's contextual, partly. It depends where you meet. So places where, for example, neurodivergent spaces. So I have been fortunate to be in programs like the Autism CRC in Australia runs different programs, and they have one called Future Leaders, which I have done in the past. And that was most magical and overwhelming at the same time experience, in the sense that you're suddenly connected to people from all around the country who all you know about each other to start off with is that you're all autistic and you all want to make positive change with that. And the focus of that program for that particular intake was people who wanted to develop community organizations or projects. So everybody who applied that time, who they took into the project, will all have the same kind of ideas, that were not the same, but had the same intentions around creating community where they lived, and in different ways. And we're all there to support each other. So that was incredibly amazing and very magical, because I'm still friends with the people from that program, and it's been years, and we still talk. Some of us talk daily, mostly all through social media. Like, there's no need for us to have to be in person to share that magic. The overwhelming I think for me, the most overwhelming aspect was actually going from the residential program where we all came together for a period of time and we had input and in terms of information and resources thrown our way. And we got to listen to other leaders in the field speak, like other autistic people. But we got to experience what it would be like to be in a world that truly met your needs. So they do the most incredible job of creating incredibly. So, for example, we spent time at the beginning of the sessions getting all the sensory environment to everybody's needs in the space. So we probably spent an hour making sure that the lighting and the sound and everything was at exactly the right level that met everyone's needs in the entire space. And then there was a range of furniture options, literally. And we had assistance animals in the room that everyone could share. They asked you for a list of your favorite foods, but also your regulating foods, what textures you like, what you didn't like, what your nutrition and dietary needs were, well, what your comfort foods were and things. And then they created a snack bar that had everything for everyone. And if there was an issue, like if you'd rocked up and suddenly the texture of your toothbrush didn't match your needs at that moment, they had neurotypical people on staff to run around and go and get you things from the shop or to make phone calls for you or whatever you needed. They knew that people would have needs and they were there for it. Yeah. So I had a medical need and had to go to the hospital. So somebody came with me to make sure that if I became overwhelmed in that sensory environment, that they would speak up and support my need for the environment to change. Yeah. So they went out of their way to create neurodivergent affirming space. Entering back into the world outside of that was quite challenging. And probably incredible. That was incredibly overwhelming. It was almost like you could forget that there wasn't that there was a world out there in which no one really kind of gave a shit. You know what I mean? Like where your needs weren't at the primary center or everyone's needs, because it wasn't you individually who had your needs met. It's that you became more mindful of everyone's needs as well, because everyone was sharing that. And so everybody enjoyed that. So in the break time, some people just wanted downtime to regulate. Other people needed engaging, structured activities, and they did all of it. You had all of the opportunities. So there was like trivia for people who wanted something that entertained their minds to do. There was craft activities, and then there was like quiet spaces. And they created all of this, and they turned off all of those blowy air things in the bathrooms. They unplugged them and put out of order signs on them for everywhere. So it was a whole lot of ways that they modified the environment. And so I think going from that, and it can happen just when you meet up with other people, that you have a sense of neurokin that I guess if you haven't experienced it, you don't get it. But if you've experienced it, you get it. That, the sense that you have a shared experience of, bringing on, being misunderstood, finding it really challenging to communicate what you intend, those kinds of challenges that I think we all face. And you meet someone else who just doesn't do that with you. And it's the most incredible moment. And then there's that sense of just overwhelm because you don't get to live like that all the time. And I think now I just value it. I just value those moments, and I make sure that I have those connections for myself. I love that I can have entire communication relationships that are concurrent info dumping, and it's wonderfully supportive and non-judgmental. And I think that's what by going through those programs and having those intense, incredibly overwhelming moments, I've been able to create a kind of network for myself of balance. It doesn't change that my mind still races and, that I still talk too much and all those kinds of things, but I know how to regulate myself at the end of the day and who to reach out to. And I know that when I do that, it won't be met with, oh, it's all about you again. It'll just be met with, oh, and today I did. And there'll be a sharing back. I think for me, that's some of the hardest parts is that when I'm trying to connect to others, I often offer information that's personal to myself and I'm trying to encourage someone to offer back, because I would feel that it would be inappropriate to ask really personal questions of somebody else. And I've always find that Neura can get that, and that I don't have to always explain myself. And that is magical.
And lastly, Freya, how can our listeners learn about you beyond this interview?
Like I'm on social media platforms such as Facebook, Instagram, and LinkedIn. I do bits and pieces from time to time. So a bit of busy week because I'm heading down to Victoria and to Melbourne, which in Australia is quite a distance. I'm doing a research panel at a conference called the Neurodivergent Affirming Therapy Conference Australia. And I don't know exactly where their resource is going to go, but that is another resource to look for. I think it's incredible that in Australia we're having entire conferences on these topics exclusively, rather than it's a side topic in a panel at a much larger conference. So we're having a whole conference on just neurodivergent therapy approaches and putting it together. And so that's exciting for me. So I'm on, I'm Freya, Pinney, the Process Repository, and Artists on Facebook. The Process Repository is on Instagram, and Freya Pinney on LinkedIn. If you search, I suppose, through somewhere like Google, maybe, I don't know what people use, but hopefully you can find some more. I do have several interviews from radio shows. There's a really great community radio station where I am in Brisbane, or Meanjin, and it has themed short radio programs run by people voluntary from the community. And one's called Only Human, and it's a disability-specific program. So I've done several interviews there on neurodivergent affirming therapeutic arts practice and different projects. They're really supportive. So I've been able to take people I work with in there, and they get a chance to be on the radio. And they've played poetry as tracks, which I think is beautiful, and allowed people to be who they are. So I really think they do some amazing work, and they don't just do that around disability. They've got interest shows on all the different topics. In Australia, we've just recently gone through a massive review of creative art therapies. The National Disability Funding Body, which is the National Disability, it's an insurance scheme, but I think it's called an incentive scheme, which provides funding for therapies and supports for people with disabilities, just attempted to wipe out all of the creative arts therapies, so art therapy and music therapy specifically. And they did a massive, since last December, it's only just been announced to have finished the entire review. And they again concluded that people who are master's qualified, professionally registered and insured are offering psychotherapy services using the materials of creative arts materials. But that actually was like a 7-month interrogation process, and was really quite damaging to the ability for art therapists to maintain their income and to offer services in their community, because it just questions the validity of what we do. So we've just gone through that in Australia, and we're only just sort of rebuilding on the other side of that.
Well, Freya, I think creative arts is such a helpful thing to us as artistic people. So I really appreciate the conversation with you today.
Thank you very much.
Thanks so much to Freya for the conversation. To learn more about Freya, please check out the link in the podcast description for this episode. We always love hearing from you, and would especially love to hear from you relating to this episode on if you've ever tried art therapy. And if so, what was your experience? Did you know Autism Personal Coach provides neurodiversity affirming support by autistics for autistics? We empower autistic adults and teens to be the best version of their authentic selves through customized life coaching and community groups. We also support parents and partners of autistic people by providing insights and guidance to bridge communication gaps and nurture mutual understanding. So please visit autismpersonalcoach.com to begin your experience of judgment-free coaching rooted in empathy, expertise, and respect for autistic identity. Until next time, I'm Doug Blutcher of Autism Personal Coach. Talk to you then.